There we are.
Met Diane.
Morning, Surge. January 11th to order. First item, number one, approval of meeting minutes. Any comments or questions? Otherwise, a motion.
Make motion.
I have a motion from Mr. Morrison, second from Mr. Wells. Weigh in with your electronic devices, please. In? Come on, baby. All right.
Did you vote?
I did. Which one?
You can see it up there.
I touched it. I said receive.
There we go.
Received.
And Bill, yours didn't log.
Did he? I saw it. I saw it go.
Thank you very much. Next up is public comment. Let me just start by welcoming the new faces here on the executive committee. Catherine and Georgette, and Jim in a new role. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Glad to have you all here. I'm sure we'll have a couple new faces next time around public comment. We have two speakers. First up, Clive Richard. Morning, Clive.
Good morning. Actually, I just want good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the executive committee. My name is Clive Richard, and I like telling people I live in the 2nd supervisory district of this county and the 9th council district of the city of San Diego. It's great to see my representative here, my council member. What I want to say to all of you is it's great to see the new faces and familiar faces in new positions. And this is going to be an interesting year. I'm not sure what that means, but I think it's going to be an interesting year. That's all I wanted to say to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Clive. Catherine Rhodes. Morning, Catherine.
Good morning, Catherine Rhodes. And what I wanted you to look into is what I say is a full title reclamation of our port and our airport. And what that would be, and the reason for that is because we have, a shallow water table and a low depth to good formational material. And in the port, they used to say that all projects, you're supposed to go at least 2 levels down, 2 levels of subterranean parking. But for some reason, the port kind of let that go. So what I'm talking about is what they did in the 1930s for the county building, and then also for 1960s for the port building, where they actually went down to the great formational material, took out all the junky soils, and got rid of all the liquefaction material that we have here. And so I was also very excited that you guys went over and saw Elon Musk up in Los Angeles. And one thing I really liked about his boring machine that he talked about is what he called boring bricks, where instead of basically he recycles the material that he takes out of the boring, and he actually makes bricks out of it. So what I always thought that we should do is get rid of all our liquefiable soils, even though it is sandy clay or clay sand mostly. There is some gravels and silts and stuff like that there. But there's an opportunity to do a full tideland reclamation so that we have, so we can found our foundations on good, competent soils instead of putting on piles like we did for the, let's say, the airport's rental car center and also for the airport's parking structure. There's a great, and then once you do that, you can actually have a transportation network underground where you already have all your right-of-ways free. We own it, the state of California owns it, or the citizens of the state of California owns it. So what I would like you to look at is that specifically. And then when I looked at the Southern California Association of Governments, just some of their documents, they talked about how the reason why they, basically there's something they called urban areas, where we have that mineral resource zone 1 where you're not really supposed to use, you're not, it doesn't show that it's material that you can use. But in San Diego, back in the 70s or 80s when it was first done that, It was done not because this was an urban area, but we have so much area here in San Diego, all along our port tidelands and all along the airport, where we could actually have a transportation network underground. We could mine the sand. One of the highest costs for construction projects in San Diego compared to everybody else is our high cost of raw materials, or sand and gravel, because we have to import everything in. We have such a gold mine that we're sitting on that we're not even using or looking at as a wonderful resource. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. That concludes public comment. We'll move on to item 3, review of draft board agendas. Victoria. Good morning.
Happy New Year. Okay, for the January 5th draft board business agenda, the first item we have is approval of the meeting minutes, followed by public comments. Item number 3 is a new monthly item that would provide the executive director the ability to provide an update to the board on key programs, projects, and agency initiatives. On the consent calendar, we have your item number 4, the Policy Advisory Committee actions, followed by item number 5, which is approval of solicitations and contracts. At this time, we're not aware of any, so this will probably be removed from the agenda. Item number 6 is an approval for the FAST Act Performance Management Rule 1 target setting, where we would be approving the 2019 statewide targets. This has gone to Public Safety and Transportation Committee and would be going to the board for final approval. Item number 7 is the regional monitoring report. This has gone through the Regional Planning Committee and will be going to the board for final acceptance. Items number 8 and 9 are your standard executive director delegated actions, followed by meetings and events attended on behalf of SANDAG. Moving on to reports, we have item number 10, which is the first reading of the proposed amendments to Transnet Ordinance for the Regional Comprehensive Fare Ordinance. This will outline the changes to the fare ordinance structure. This is the first reading, and then the final approval would be slated for the board in February. Item number 11 is the annual review of proposed amendments to board policies and bylaws. Pending today's actions by the executive committee, this would go to the board in January for final approval. And this is followed by item number 12, which is the proposed FY19 program budget amendment for the airport development planning, which is an item that the board approved last month. Item number 13 is an information item on data science and big data. This is a new initiative that the agency would undertake to basically build on the data that we're currently collecting to better inform planning and operations. So we'll give you an update on this. And then in addition to these items, we would like to potentially add a regional plan update to this agenda.
Any comments or questions on that agenda? Jim.
I have a question on item 12, the $1 million for these subcommittee related expenses. Can we have a breakout of those anticipated expenses? Because that sounds like a hell of a party going to be going on at that committee for $1 million.
Correct. That's what this item would go over, is the breakdown of the expenditures of the $1 million.
Okay, and I guess the biggest expenditures expected would be appreciated. Okay.
Any other comments or questions?
All right, thank you.
Okay, let's move on to the next draft board agenda.
February 8th, for the draft board policy agenda, we have standing item number 1, public comments, followed by the executive director's report. Item number 2 for information. Under reports, we have item number 3, which is the SANDAG Independent Performance Auditor. The interviews will be taking place this Friday, and at this meeting we would be approving the terms of the contract for the person that is selected. Item number 4 is the second reading for the proposed amendments to the Regional Transit Comprehensive Fare Ordinance that I explained earlier. And then item number 5 is the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. This would be a discussion where we would be looking at the high-level criteria that would be proposed from the RENA subcommittee and try to translate this into a formula that would be applied to the jurisdictions. And then in addition to that, we are asking to add a closed session item related to whole agencies and data.
Comments, questions? Otherwise, I'm looking for a motion and a second.
Move to approve.
Thank you. Second from Jet. Excuse me. Please weigh in. Thanks, Victoria. Next up, item 4, annual review of proposed amendments to board policies and bylaws. John.
Good morning. I'm here today as a follow-on to your consideration at your December meeting of proposed amendments to Sandag's bylaws and board policies. Throughout the year, the Office of General Counsel solicits requests for potential changes to our bylaws and board policies, and the Executive Committee and subsequently the Board of Directors have a process to review these proposed changes. Some of these reflect changes in the law, while others propose process improvements or seek to clarify ambiguities identified both internally and through member agencies throughout the year. This year, we're proposing amendments to the bylaws and to 12 of the board policies. When these were discussed at your December meeting, some modifications to the proposed amendments were requested. The bylaws and each of the policies proposed for amendments are attached to your report in red line strikeout format. And the modifications since your December meeting are additionally shown in yellow highlight. Today I'll be presenting only on the policies that have changed since your last meeting, but I'll be happy to address any questions you would have on any of the other policies as well. The first one that we'll look at are the Sandag bylaws. These are attachment 1 to your report, and specifically we're looking at amendments to Article 3, Section 5.
Do you have a page number in
That
there?
is page 5 on the report or 16 on your tablets.
Thank you.
Amendments to that Article 3 are proposed related to board member compensation. Overall, this section is fully reorganized to now separately address board meetings, PAC meetings, working group meetings, and outside events. Outside events, each has a separate category. And looking at other meetings and events, at outside events, those are covered in subsection D. And the proposed change there would provide compensation for each day of an outside meeting or event where business is conducted. The compensation would be $100 for outside meeting or event. It's currently $150, but instead it's being paid on a per day basis. And this recognizes that board members sometimes attend multi-day conferences on behalf of Sandag, but for those they're paid the same as attending an event that may only last for a few hours. So in that event, they would be paid that stipend for each day they are in attendance at that outside event when business is conducted. So if you're going to NARC or APTA or something like that, those would be the types of things. In 2017, there were 12 outside events ranging from 2 to 5 days. Overall, the budget impact should be neutral on that. The part of this one that has changed since you've seen it is that there's an exclusion for these outside events in the current language where members are not compensated for attending ethics training and similar classes. That was in the pre-existing language from when this was initially adopted. We've had a comment asking to clarify that an outside educational event, such as a conference that's attended by a board member as a representative of Sandag, would still qualify for compensation. And that change has been made and is shown in the yellow highlight.
Let me interrupt for a second. I wonder what the rationale was on reducing from 150 to 100. I understand that for a one-day local event when you go to a ribbon cutting or something. But again, with the travel, let's say Washington, D.C. or Sacramento, it would seem more appropriate to keep that at 150 if we could bifurcate that. I don't know how the rest of the committee feels and when it's appropriate to discuss that, but I think it should be.
I support that.
Well, I do have a question, just in the amended, the proposed language. I do feel that the wording event, it's a little bit vague. So I don't know if there could be specific examples or, and I can see why we wouldn't, but I just feel that meetings or events.
Probably the thing that makes, that would modify that a little bit is what comes after it, where it says when officially representing the board. So that's something to where you are being tasked by leadership or otherwise to go and represent Sandag somewhere. It's not just a casual attendance at something. Mm-hmm. If there's other language you'd like to consider, we can certainly do that.
Okay.
Well, I think the chair's suggested modification for events that are out of town, if we could add in a clause that would allow for that.
So it would be 100 for meetings or events locally, 150 per day for out-of-town events? Is that what
we're traveled somehow. I'm thinking Washington DC, Sacramento, where you gotta get on a plane and go somewhere.
Outside the region.
Outside the region, that would make sense.
Yeah,
Couple,
the jurisdiction, yeah.
Jim,
that's
you look
better.
like you've got a question or concern.
Yeah, I always do, I think. I look that way. Thank you. Well, okay, you're going to Washington DC or something like that, and maybe it's you're part of a group, or I don't know, the chamber group or something like that. You're not really speaking for the board. You are a representative because you're on Sandag, but you are not speaking, none of us really, the board speaks for the board. So I don't know how that ties in.
I would make a distinction. When we do chamber trip, let's say, to
Yeah.
DC, we often do side meetings with our congressional delegation and others. It's not just the chamber conference items. We did, I think, 4 or 5 side meetings the last chamber DC trip.
Yeah, I get that. So you want to include those?
Yes, absolutely.
I think most of the time we were talking about this yesterday. Any conference that our board will attend in DC or Sacramento will include many other meetings on behalf of the agency and behalf of the board. So we don't just go with the chamber just to go and walk around.
I guess I'm being too nitpicky, because when I go, and it's more of an education for me, as opposed to, I'm not speaking for them.
Supervisor, that's a good point, but the language doesn't say speaking for, it just says representing. So you're just there on behalf, even if you don't say anything.
I'm splitting hairs, okay.
I think making those distinctions, like a local event versus out of state or, yeah.
Yeah.
But I still think events is a little bit vague.
Okay, so we're good with those suggestions. I'm sorry.
So just to comment on that, in Mexico City, I go as the chair of the Borders Committee, and so obviously there's the meetings, but reality is the Borders kind of group, Victoria, et cetera, and I are, and well, Hassan will be next, and Gary, and Ron would go off to meetings about border stuff, and we are representing Sandag at those meetings. I wouldn't suppose to speak for Sandag at a big conference, but definitely in those meetings.
So again, to clarify, meeting or event, we'd like to see that, if we can button that up a little bit. And outside the jurisdiction is $150 a day, and local is still $100.
I think that makes sense.
We can do that. Yeah, bring that back to the board when we bring this.
Sorry for that interruption.
That's perfect. So that's it on the bylaws. The next one that a modification has been made to since we last spoke to you is Board Policy 17, Delegation of Authority. And specifically looking at section 4.1, that's 44 on your report or 55 on your tablets. Section 4.1 of this policy delegates to the executive director the authority to make budget modifications. The existing language has that at the delegated authority at $100,000 per modification. The proposed amendment that was made by leadership at the last executive committee meeting would be to raise that from $100,000 to $300,000. We look back, and the amount that's delegated in this has remained unchanged since the policy was first adopted in 2003. Certainly the cost of the types of things that we might enter into contracts for with this has risen since that time. Any new agreements that are entered into under this delegated authority would still be subject to Sandag's regular competitive procurement rules. And that is the only change that's been made since your last meeting for Board Policy 17. And then finally, Board Policy 30, the Contingency Reserve Policy. That's attachment 11 to your report, and the changes we're looking at began on page 69 or 80 on your tablet. Some way of background, back in September of 2017, the Board of Directors approved a budget amendment to create a new Transnet Major Corridors Program Contingency Reserve to manage unidentified risks to the Major Corridors Program and to set aside a contingency reserve fund there and to dictate how that fund, the balance in that fund should be calculated. These procedures include consideration of risk level, the size of the Transnet construction program, and the amount of upcoming work to establish the appropriate amount of the Transnet Major Corridors Program Contingency Reserve account. This is reflective of current board direction establishing and protecting this reserve fund. The proposed modification that's shown in yellow there would modify the timing of when this calculation happens to coincide with the annual program budget update rather than with the annual plan of finance. This was suggested by staff after you last saw this, looking at it, recognizing that the annual plan of finance, while it happens every year, it happens at different times throughout the year, whereas the annual budget process always happens in the same schedule, culminating in late spring. So we felt that that would be a better business practice to have that done on a more regular basis. That is the only change to that board policy. In addition to the proposed amendments, also attached to your report are Board Policy 3, Sandag's investment policy, and that calls for the board to annually renew its delegation of authority to the executive director for conducting investments on behalf of Sandag consistent with the rules that are laid out in that policy. And also Board Policy 32, the San Diego County Regional Transportation Commission interest rate swap policy, attachment 13, that calls for an annual review and renewal of that policy. That policy was reviewed by management and the Sandag Financial Advisor, PFM, and based on that review, no changes are proposed. And so these two actions are also included in the recommendation that's before you today. So overall, the Executive Committee today is asked to recommend that the Board of Directors approve the proposed amendments to the Sandag bylaws and board policies, attachments 1 through 14, and as I understand it, we have direction on defining meetings and recognizing out-of-jurisdiction meetings at 150, and also renew its annual delegation of authority to the Executive Director pursuant to Board Policy 3, the investment policy, and approval of Board Policy 32, the San Diego County Regional Transportation Commission interest rate swap policy. That concludes my report, and I'm happy to answer anything else.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just kind of, maybe it's in a different action, but I know that there was also a recommendation to reduce the fees related to the
RTCIP?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm
Is that
happy
in
to
the
address
second?
that. It's
Okay.
actually not reducing that. So under the RTCIP is a program under your Transnet ordinance.
Yeah.
And it generally requires payment of a specified fee. Originally it was $2,000, it's indexed every year. It's now just short of $2,500 per residential unit. But there's a number of different categories of types of residential units that are exempt from collection of that fee. Already exempt from it are what is termed as a guest dwelling.
Yes.
But it doesn't give any more definition of what that means. So under Board Policy 31, those are all the interpretive rules for the Transnet ordinance. Rule 23 in that, we're adding language to say what that term guest dwelling means in the ordinance. And we've done that, first of all, looking at the government code. There's been a lot of state legislation on this, and it defines an accessory dwelling unit. Then we've taken that to the CTAC, to the TWIG, ITOC to get feedback on how does that work with all of our jurisdictions, recognizing that everybody has a little bit of a different program, making sure that we have a definition that works for everyone. And that is what you have now. So it's not reducing or
We're just
increasing.
defining it.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
we
that-
just wanted to make sure that that was
Yeah,
part
this
of it. I
is a
know
tool
that
for
it's critical for.
I would follow up on that though. If you're redefining it or making a more specific definition, could that change? Could it change though the policy though, or?
Could,
Well, you just said that it doesn't really change anything except for the definition.
Right.
But when you change the definition, sometimes that changes how it actually affects everything else.
based on what we've seen, because it was so vague before, we don't see this as either including or excluding any additional units. Staff in the past year or so, as the development of these has increased a lot, it's got a lot of inquiries from local jurisdictions saying, we have this particular application, does this qualify for a guest dwelling? And without any more direction, we don't really have a tool to say yes or no to that. Instead, what we're just trying to do is to say, let's look at what the state says, basically a guest dwelling. They just call it something different. Whether it's a guest dwelling, a granny flat, or an accessory dwelling unit, they all generally mean the same thing. We've given some very high-level attributes of what those are so that those characteristics can be implemented and used by all our jurisdiction staff to give them some clarification.
No, and we're appreciative of that, so thank you. I know that if there was a request from the city of San Diego and that stood from.
And I think that may have been actually the genesis of us really looking deeply at this. We
Yeah,
appreciate
no,
that.
and I appreciate that, and for us it's important because we're trying to make it more accessible for folks to take advantage of the implementation and this is a huge thing for people, so we appreciate that.
I got to follow up on that. Just so the county, we just 2 days ago waived all permit fees for all accessory dwelling units. Somebody wants to put in, it's up to like 14 grand a year, is what, or 14 grand per permit. And we didn't put any restrictions on whether it was a granny flat, whether it could even be a rental income property. So I'm just wondering, is this $2,500, when you say guest dwelling unit, sounds like you can't use it for income, nor could you use it for mom and dad that are moving in now. They're not, I don't know if they're guests or family or what, how defined. I mean, if somebody has to put on their application guest dwelling unit as opposed to income unit, they don't. When do they get the credit?
It'd be my opinion, looking at that just very quickly here, whether there's a receipt of income or not related to that unit would not be relevant.
Okay.
Whether it would qualify as a guest dwelling or accessory dwelling unit under this.
So
I can add to that because I'm very familiar with this issue. For the city of San Diego, we define guest dwelling units as a unit that you cannot, and this is how we define it. It all depends on how the county defines it. Literally, you cannot rent it for income. But accessory dwelling unit, a granny flat, you can. So it literally is defined. It's defined on your code. So it wouldn't be the SANDAG. This has nothing to do with how you, as a jurisdiction, define these different categories. So you just have to go back to your own code.
Well, I guess we didn't differentiate at all. So we just said it's an accessory dwelling unit. You don't have to pay. We gave them a 5-year permit waiver is what we did. I'm just curious. So a guest dwelling unit. So if it is for rental income, they don't get the break then on the $2,500.
No, they do.
No, they do.
They do.
Okay, they do.
In terms of your own county.
You determine how to define it.
Yeah, you have your county fees and how you collect those. We're not dictating that. Just in terms of this one RTCI fee, the Transnet fee is the only thing we're touching.
So would they still have to pay the Transnet fee if it is an income generating dwelling? So you're saying
if it would still qualify as the exemption, so they do not pay the Transnet fee. If it otherwise qualifies as a guest dwelling, but they're receiving income from it, it would not be subject to the Transnet fee.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Any other comments, questions? Do we need a vote to recommend, or?
Yes, sir.
Need a motion? Thank you. Looking for a second?
Second.
Those are with the stated modifications?
Correct. Please vote. Thank you. In the interest of time, we're going to have a 90-second legislative status report update from Victoria, so we can get to our other meeting. Thanks, thank you.
All right. So Governor Newsom released the 2019-2020 budget yesterday. The highlights are that it is about $8 billion more than the Governor Brown's proposal from his last budget. 86% of it is one-time funding. I think the one thing that's in particular that you need to know is that there's a desire to take the RENA process from a planning process to a production process, and that if jurisdictions did not reach their housing goals of what they implement as far as new housing, then transportation gas tax funding could be withheld from that jurisdiction. The administration, we hear, is working to formulate a group to solicit input from the various regions, and we are committed to participating in those discussions and ensuring that San Diego's perspective is represented at this forum.
And just, Mr. Chair, to add one thing to that, making the RENA not planning exercise of an actual building of housing. This will also, there were a lot of discussions with the governor of what we're going to be having with our legislators about also looking at redevelopment 2.0, they call it, and linking that to housing and transportation. So stay tuned for that, but this governor is determined to address this issue.
And then the one thing on the federal government, clearly we're in a partial shutdown. This looks like this will be the longest shutdown in U.S. history, 21 days as of now. Really the impacts on the region will be predicated on the duration of the shutdown. So we'll keep you apprised, but as of right now, we believe that none of our major our projects would be impacted by the actions or the lack of actions of the federal government.
Thank you, Victoria. Appreciate it. We have no further public comment. Next meeting, February 8th, 9 a.m. Back to our normal time. That will adjourn. See you in the other room.
So, you know, we've also been really involved in accessory dwelling units, and I think personally,